history of our country's constant search for justice, some names of ordinary citizens stand for millions of souls. Plessy, Brown, Parks. To that distinguished list, today we add the name of Fred Korematsu.
In Search of Justice, Triumph and Tragedy in the Case of Korematsu versus United States. December 7th, 1941. Japanese planes attacked Pearl Harbor. The attack killed more than 2,300 Americans and destroyed a majority of U.S. warships. Americans were shocked and outraged by the Japanese sneak attack.
That put such fear into the United States. It was what you call knee-jerk fear. Everybody was scared that all the Japanese were going to come and kill them.
There was a fear of espionage, possibly sabotage on the part of Japanese Americans in particular.
The next day, FDR declared war against Japan in his Day of Infamy speech to Congress. The United States had officially entered World War II. The declaration of war brought anxiety and fear to Fred Korematsu's family, who was running a floral nursery in Oakland, California. Fred Korematsu was a welder at an Oakland shipyard, but was fired due to his Japanese ancestry. When he heard the Pearl Harbor attack news over the radio of his car, he rushed to the nursery.
He was shocked that Japan would attack Pearl Harbor, but in addition, as a person of Japanese ancestry, there was great fear that America would turn on Japanese Americans.
Japanese Americans were discriminated against even before the attack on Pearl Harbor. The popular press and politicians were quick to blame the Japanese American population for the destruction of Pearl Harbor and began to call for their removal. General DeWitt, an ardent supporter of evacuation, convinced the Justice Department and President Roosevelt that the exclusion of Japanese people from the West Coast was a military necessity. On February 19, 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, which authorized any military commander to exclude any person of Japanese ancestry in order to defend the nation. Fred's family, as well as 110,000 other people, had to report to assembly centers, where they were transported to numerous internment camps. Korematsu decided to stay behind with his girlfriend. On May 30th, 1942, Fred planned to meet her in San Leandro, but was charged with breaking Public Law 503, which was a federal crime. While in a San Francisco jail, Ernest Bizik of ACLU approached Korematsu to become a test case to challenge the internment orders. Fred agreed, but the federal court convicted him of defying military orders and placed a $5,000 bail. Later, the Army escorted him to the Tanforan Assembly Center.
When Fred arrived, he was put into a horse stall. He described about how the only thing in the horse stall was a cot and a single light bulb, and that the wind came through the slats in the wall.
You could still smell the horses in there. We all got on a train in wooden seats, bench seats, and only had what we could carry.
Later, Korematsu was moved to Topaz War Relocation Center in Utah. The camp was located in a desert with harsh weather conditions.
Triangle-shaped buildings, barracks, with black tar paper on the outside. They were cold in the winter, warm in the summer. There were mosquitoes, snakes, bugs of all kinds. They were not attractive at all, and very depressing and dismal.
Korematsu and his family shared 2 small rooms at the camp, but the circumstances there were miserable. No one wanted to talk or associate with him.
Fred would bring shame and negative attention to Japanese Americans, that by making noise, it would only be bad for everybody, not just him, but that the government would take it out on everyone else.
The Korematsu case lingered in the Supreme Court for 2 years. On December 10, 1944, Fred's attorneys argued that Executive Order 9066 was a clear violation of the 14th and 5th Amendments, but the Supreme Court, in a 6-3 decision, concluded that Korematsu's case was not about race. Instead, it was a military necessity in time of war.
Justice Black wrote the majority opinion for the court in Korematsu, and he essentially said that in a time of war, that the President and the Congress together receive a tremendous amount of deference in terms of determining what is actually necessary in order to prosecute the war.
Justice Owen Roberts wrote a very powerful dissenting opinion. He stated firmly that the Korematsu case was a clear violation of constitutional rights. Justice Murphy, in a stirring dissent, condemned this as a legalization of racism.
Justice Jackson said, if we say that this is okay, that the government can do what it wants and we're not going to question it, very famous line he said is that a judicial validation of this order lies about like a loaded weapon, ready for the hand of any authority that can bring a plausible claim of urgent need.
After losing the case, Korematsu said, "It just seemed like the bottom dropped out. I just felt like, am I an American or not? And how about all those other Japanese Americans?" Korematsu versus the US is considered a tragedy in the history of Supreme Court decisions and is widely condemned. Saddened but not defeated, Korematsu waited for another chance to reopen the case. In 1982, Peter Irons, a historian and lawyer, discovered a memo written by Edward Ennis to Solicitor General Fahey.
Ennis said, "We are in possession of information that shows that the War Department's report on the internment is a lie. And we have an ethical obligation not to tell a lie to the Supreme Court. And we must decide whether to correct that record." And looking at that document, I still remember vividly thinking, oh my God, this is amazing. This is like a smoking gun.
Peter Irons organized a legal team of young Japanese American lawyers, including Lorraine Benai, and they filed a writ of coram nobis on Fred's behalf.
So we argued that there was this wrong that was committed. So the coram nobis relief requires you to prove that the conviction was the result of a manifest injustice. And so we presented the evidence of we presented the arguments of the evidence that was suppressed to show that the case had to be reopened and that his conviction had to be vacated.
On November 10, 1983, Judge Patel, based on suppressed evidence, vacated Korematsu's conviction in the federal court for the Northern District of California, the very same court that had convicted him 41 years earlier. Fred Korematsu told in an interview that it was not only a victory for him, but it was a victory for the 110,000 Japanese Americans that were put in the concentration camps. The 1988 Civil Liberties Act, signed by Reagan, issued an apology letter and $20,000 to all living Japanese who were in the internment camps. Korematsu became an outspoken advocate for civil liberties. In the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, he knew the government, which turned on the Japanese in 1942, could repeat itself to Arab Americans.
Everybody talks about it happening again, or will it happen again? And everybody knows that it's quite a possibility that it could. We hope it doesn't, but that doesn't mean it won't. And I had 3 men come in the door one day, and they said, "I think we should go put all the Muslims in the camps. Are they still open?"
Today, you'll see the Korematsu case has been talked about just as much now, or probably more now, than it was discussed in the 1940s, where the government is saying, because of national security, we need a border wall. Because of national security, we need a travel ban. Because of national security, we need to do all of these different things to exclude people.
And it is a reminder that we have to be vigilant. Yes, we have courts at our disposal. Yes, we have our representatives in Congress who can do something about it, but we too as citizens have a role to play, and we have voices.
The tragedy of Korematsu raises questions about what qualifies as military necessity. Yet, through Korematsu's perseverance and loyalty to America, we remember his journey as a triumph of our brotherhood from sea to shining sea.